And now I would like to welcome our last presenter for the day. It's Jed from Northeastern University, London. And I must mention, Jed would be using a flipped learning approach. So I'm sharing the slides that he asked me to send to you before, but I wasn't sure if I could send to the entire community or to the people joining. So I believe you should be able to access the slides. And Jed, over to you. Whenever you're ready, feel free sharing your screen if you want to, or make a start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, no, I was going to say what I do is I use Chroma Key in OBS. OBS is a free system. One of the parts that I've been doing is for about 10 years or so, running free workshops on building websites. And most of the curriculum is based upon a principle of guerrilla marketing. So if it can be done for low or no cost, then that's the option to take. So Power BI is a very good example where Looker Studio, Google's original data studio that became Looker Studio, is free to use. So in comparison to the £3 a month that you have to pay to use Power BI and the user interface being a lot easier to use, one can use it as maximum as one can, and then also teach it so people can then say, can you do this, this, and this? Yes, the answer is you can have your data in any way you would like. The next question is, can I do it myself? Yes, you can. I'll show you how it's done. So a major barrier to Power BI, which is fantastic, is it's not particularly user-friendly and you have to pay for it. Whereas Looker Studio is incredibly straightforward to both use and to teach. I'm Joe Keenan. I am the VLE and Learning Resources Manager. So I run the library service of a very large annex of the very, very large Northeastern University. So we have only about 3,000 students here, but current events is making that slightly different. My presentation today is very much going to be a script and a flipped presentation. So all of this content has been circulated by Angel, so that one of the points I make is an informed audience is a more engaged audience. One point I should make before I've started, which is I naively put this presentation in front of a senior member of the maths faculty, and for a good half an hour or so, he championed the practical imperative of epistemological sophistication in teaching of maths and science. So for anyone in the audience who is of a maths and science orientation, it's an entirely legitimate criticism of my narrative-driven presentation. So yeah, thanks for Tobias for pointing out to me that not everything can be intuited. Quite often in maths and science, one has to have things explained. There's no way around it. There's no making it a nice, simple story structure. So this presentation is absolutely not about practice. I am a big fan of Michael Fullan, and he describes that as individual heroism. This presentation is all about what he calls system quality, as in full appreciation of and the effective allocation of resources, institutional time and funds, money. There are certainly some engaging teaching materials included, but both detailed and demonstrated, and even a principle to live by, but they are all in service of a strategic purpose. And this is the purpose of this presentation, which is to achieve an emergent property. I start out with an emergent property, which is a group of students transitioning to a college of students, of having a common cause. Nelson Aldrich, in his book, describes old money people priding themselves on nurturing friendship over education. And I can appreciate the long-term strategy of old money, that the use of friendship is its own value, an emergent property. And emergent property requires a phase transition, which can be spontaneous, ad hoc, or organized. So what we're looking at is what a colleague of mine described as the magic. So the spontaneous or ad hoc creation of this emergent property. I'm looking at its organized transition. This is actually rather easy task. Involves the easy task of overcoming atomized self-interest. Rousseau, in Discourse on the original origin and foundation of inequality among men, states that it is just a present and perceptible interest that can be overcome by collective action, that can overcome the collective action problem, more commonly known as the stag hunt. So this is a group of people hunting a large herbivore, but one of them sees a rabbit. So they either stay still and continue to hunt the stag, or one of them eats the rabbit, annoying everybody. So the collective self-interest and the present perceptible interest is the antidote. So seeing the wider value, the common cause, helps avoid free riding. Let me just post that up because that's a really useful little piece there. Let's just go back to it. So there you go. So in answer to the next question, is it a quality of the facilities, the standing of the standing of the faculty, or just a generalized reputation that students use as a metric, a macro metric of their education provider? These all do vaguely provide for the present and perceptible interest of students, but the purpose of today's presentation is really that there is a clear need for more specificity. And so what I've done is I have started to use the general term technical sophistication as an assessment criteria. So this is, instead of us wanting students to be more engaged, we are putting it on the students to measure their own engagement and our effectiveness of being engaged, our technical sophistication. So technical sophistication, I suggest, breaks down into 3 different groups, because this is the workflow that I'm working to. Operational optimization. This is freeing up time to be able to undertake the work, which are the next 2 pieces. So, for example, coincidentally today, a task is done, it's a manual task every year. We are using an AI tool to circumvent spending £5,000 writing code to automate that process, because it doesn't take that much time to do the task. So the cost benefit analysis says, we can basically still do it manually, but as we grow, we're going to need to automate it. So let's automate the process. Well, AI tool is how we're going to do it. So we are planning that, doing the testing and etc. And it's turned out to be an incredibly straightforward process. The manual task, the user interface represents the mechanisms that are already in place, and so the prompt, which is take data from the previous instance and add to the current instance, is pretty straightforward for it to understand. So actually, that entire process, taking a task that is done by one person and taking it down to a task that's done by no people, is pretty straightforward, and therefore optimizing the operations of the institution. What we've been doing is integrating systems, so a task that's done by 2 people is now done by 1, and the same now with tasks that are done by 1 people being done by no people, which is worrying because 1 is making oneself redundant, but at the same time it frees 1 up to do these other 2 tasks. Technical sophistication is a process of redundancy, sorry, organizational optimization, that then allows for these next 2 parts. The next 2 parts are data-led decision-making. Looker Studio is critical for that, for putting data in front of students, their own data in front of faculty, managers and faculty, and then senior managers as KPI. data-led decision-making, the present and perceptible interest, or the presentation of perceptible changes that are the result of interconnected individual and individual activities. So that means that a student who is seeing their class going through all the reading materials and then completing the ungraded survey in a short period of time is going to be more likely to continue to go through the reading materials and complete the ungraded survey. So as soon as a student sees that there is no free riding, they see common cause. An assurance, and the third one is an assurance of the provision of both fully engaging methods of teaching and instructional resources, which is my presentation is a demonstration of that, but also that we have now the time to support faculty in their lectures, in their presentations, sticking the landing, really kind of making it real. And again, apologies to the mathematicians. This is a narrative structure rather than the actual plodding necessity of teaching abstract concepts by somebody who already understands them. This is an unsophisticated epistemological model, but there is some value in its application, and I'll talk about that later. I fully accept that the concept technical sophistication is a rather ironically epistemologically unsophisticated concept, and I fully appreciate the fundamental need for epistemological sophistication. That said, learning is very often most effective through the use of simple storytelling and its clear narrative pacing and arcing structure. And so my next question is to yourselves is, do you think that I will stick the landing on this presentation? Hopefully. So next I go to students. Talking of assessment criteria, the first and third of these three criteria in front of you, of these three questions, are my own tests for any presentation, every presentation that I've ever received. Am I respected? And can the presenter stick the landing? You can probably guess the frequency that this has occurred. So of the three options, almost never, the majority of times never, almost never, and never. Yeah, it's never. Nobody has ever been able to demonstrate to me as that the presenter is appreciative of the time of the people who are listening to the presenter, and when the presenter has gone through the arc of their slide deck and presented to and completed, have they been able to satisfy the full completion of the process? And the answer is no. It's not as easy as one imagines it would be. But that said, it's a technique. It's a technique that can be learned and applied. So here's a few more presentation assessment criteria. Number and total of each slide. You can see I've got slide 4 of 9. So I've given you the respect of saying this is going to be completed in 5 slides time. A prepared audience is a participatory audience. So your participation is greater because I've circulated, Angela had circulated and then repeated in the chat. All of the preparatory content that goes into these slides, plus these slides with hyperlinks to absolutely everything, including the Wikipedia entry for Monster, Ninja Turtles. Why so many slides? I've got 9 slides. Is that too many? Probably is a bit too many now, I think. Having 30 slides is, yeah, it's counterproductive to say the least. Brevity is a criteria that I would always apply. There's a great quote about being an infant is infinite, but everything after that is extreme brevity. I was like, yeah, no, that's about right. Bullets over 7 are utterly useless, and always have scripted content in the presentation notes. So I'm looking at my scripted content in the presentation notes. I'm not reading the slides because, well, once in a while I'll reference them, but generally slides should always speak for themselves. So there are lots of opportunities for presenting information to students that isn't a straightforward singular repetition of a slide. Slides can have different purposes, and so this is an additional purpose. A straw man, or in the UK here, an Aunt Sally, it's kind of cool, types of rhetorical questioning which are very useful as a means of providing a voice to an audience, particularly with regard to legitimate concerns. So I've already apologized to mathematicians. Insight into to an audience about what their legitimate concerns should actually be, because this is a learning environment, and therefore, a lot of people in the audience don't know what they should be concerned about. And finally, an invitation, which we don't have much of a time here to do, which is to both debate and to make additions to these entirely legitimate questions. Note that they are not used to win a debate, and they are purposely not spacious, I can never pronounce that word, annoying or downplaying. They certainly can be, but these questions are incredibly useful, especially for presenter to, for me, a presenter to be made to answer. Fully presented in the Miro board, and I have actually had most enjoyment doing of all this entire project, answering my own straw man questions. So I'm thinking, what is the most difficult question that I'm going to be asked? Now I have to answer it. So if you go to the Miro board and look at slide 509, you'll see a lot of the evidence that answers the question about efficacy, heavy obligation, etc. This is one of two, as I've indicated in my slide, about how many of these straw man questions I have. So this is the second of the straw man questions. This is more of a segue to my next point, but it's, again, still incredibly useful to use straw man arguments. There is a real possibility of increased complexity, and there's no denying it. If we are looking to achieve a emergent property, we are going to reap the whirlwind. But is that a bad thing to do, or as I phrase it here, is it a good thing? But spontaneous complexity occurs in both the current state and any emergent state. So there's no sort of avoiding complexity. We kind of have it occurring anyway. Any marginal increase in complexity is inherently bad. And what if a planned increase in complexity actually correlates to an increased capacity to cope with, to process, and to build up from a newly advanced position? Education is a sanctuary for practice and rehearsal. It is not a sanctuary from the real world complexity. The fundamental value for students of the provision of education is an emergent in complexity, in sophisticated epistemology. So, if you don't mind, let's do a little bit of engagement, and it's the barest possible minimum. May I ask you to put a thumbs up if you found this 20-minute immersion so far, 16 minutes immersion useful? I should move across here. Moved.
So do we do it on the Teams, or do we do it on Miro board?
If you have your camera on, you can do it with your actual thumb.
Okay.
But yeah, no, Teams is fine.
Oh, I have just my cam.
Yay, one actual thumb.
There are a few now.
So I now turn to the more practical steps. Isn't engagement a bidirectional activity? So if it is, then what simple action can ensure that students both know this and act upon this understanding? I mentioned earlier that a prepared audience is a participatory audience, but is participation an innate skill? I would actually say no, it isn't. It is something that needs to be taught and to be learned. Three great questions that can inculcate life into inanimate snow goons, like the previous slide's diagram shows, is Jed, can you expand upon the point about? Or Jed, why is your point about something important? And Jed, what other examples about the thing that you're saying can you share? You think a good question is kind of something that occurs normally, but actually it's a format, and it can be taught and it can be applied. So a presentation by a newly elevated professor, she stated that the most difficult question that she receives is, why is something that you're speaking about important? So of course, at the end, when she asks the questions, my hand goes up and up a dozen people because it's all the faculty members there. And all of our question is, why is this thing that you're talking about important? We couldn't help ourselves. It was Pavlovian. It was funny. There is an aphorism. Questions come in two types: the questions that you know the answers to, and the questions that you praise because you've been given an opportunity to expand your own knowledge and do a little bit of research and get back to the person who's asked the question. Never fear the question, whatever type. In fact, in some ways, I prefer questions I don't know the answers to. They are awesome. My mind expands enormously by hanging out with people who know more than I do. The reverse is less enjoyable. So this is me completed. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organisers, Anshul, Caroline, May, and secondly, do make sure that your students aren't off the hook. It is my hopeful takeaway from this presentation that students are helped to be fully informed and active agents in their own educational outcomes, making them engaging for you. Engaging students are more enjoyable to teach. The more enjoyment one gets from teaching, the more they learn. So make certain that they're engaging for you and not just the other way around. And thirdly, I sincerely hope that this presentation benefits you in your own future endeavours.
Thank you so much, Jed.
One final point, Columbo style. I don't know if you've seen him. He always comes back with, I've got this one final question, and reveals who the murderer is. Do make sure to ask presentation participants to actively assess your presentation. To have an active effect on the presenter's feelings, mine, is thoroughly empowering experience. And so also pandering to an audience is awesome. So thank you very much for your excellent questions before you put them in. Let's have a look at how much time we have. There's 11 minutes available for questions. You're very welcome to ask questions, and I will judge differently.
Thank you so much, Jed, for your presentation and your unique, different, distinct approach of presenting.